I think that's good.
Yeah. So thanks everyone for coming, and special thanks to our guest panelists, Ian, Bill Choi, and Will Strange. They've got some great stories and of how they've developed their products. As some of you may know, this is a regular Lunch and Learn series that Dream Launch have developed as part of a knowledge library for everyone interested in the future of product development. And basically, we're celebrating a new partnership with a company called Aerion Technologies. CEO founder is co-hosting us today. That's Andrew Romeo, and it's to do very much with our, I guess, enhanced IoT capability now for helping people build products. And what better way to celebrate that than sort of hear from people who've been in the trenches and have got lots of stories to share. Also like to thank very briefly Dave, I think. He has quite an amazing group of entrepreneurs and innovators and networks that he's built over in Southeast Asia. And he's one of our event partners as well. So I thought to start things, before I go on, I'll just very briefly mention that our next webinar will be on the 18th of November. And I'll put a link in for a special Venture Cafe event next Thursday at 5 o'clock. It's part of the Spark Festival. The event's called From Hardware Startup to Advanced Manufacturing. And Dream Launch will actually have a table there. But more than us, it's pretty much the entire sort of prototyping hardware ecosystem, from CSIRO to universities to companies like us, to prototyping and design companies. So it's something that I'd encourage you all to come to in terms of if you want to tap into the whole hardware startup and manufacturing ecosystem. And last but not least, I'd encourage everyone to text chat in terms of any questions from the get-go, because we'd like to make it as interactive as possible. Okay, so let's get started with Hamed and Andrew to really talk about IoT technology, what it is in terms of what Dream Launch does and what Aerion does, Aerion Technologies in terms of software. So over to you guys.
Thank you, Alex, and hi everyone. Thank you for coming to this event. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces and a few others that we want to get to know each other a bit more. As Alex said, Dream Launch are involved in product development, sort of like end-to-end processes. We mainly focusing on hardware and some electronics in the IoT, but then we are partnered now with Aerion Technologies, which together we can develop the whole IoT solution, in a complete form. It is very important because we're going to discuss it in these events, but it's important to know when you started looking to any product developments or any business, to have a better understanding of what software and hardware does for you, how their interactions comes together, and how you can actually use it to develop a product that it's not only do the functions, but your customer really love it and interact with it easily, and it do the very good jobs. I'm not going to talk too much today, only an introduction and say hello to everyone. I'll pass it to Andrew, and then we'll start with our panels. Andrew?
Thanks, thanks, Amir. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about IoT and our partnership. So what we're all about is at Aerion and DevReady is all about building the right product for the customer. But to do that, we've implemented a lot of engineers and built a team over the past 12 years building technology in predominantly software space and software technology. And we've dabbled in the areas of IoT through different partnerships and projects along the journey, but coming together with Dream Launch allows us to work together collaboratively to solve problems for people that are looking to venture into the IoT space. It is a complex beast because you're dealing with both software and hardware together. That could be electronic, mechanical as well. There's a number of different pieces that come into it. And there's different types of software that exist in the space. There's software that sits on the device at the low level, but then there's also what the customer interacts with. If you've got a customer-centric product, it might be an app, for example, that people interact with. So there is a bit of detail that comes into this. And throughout the process mapping and journey, there's a lot of pieces that need to work together coherently to make sure we deliver the right outcomes. So we're looking forward to catching up with our guests and learning about their experiences today too. And thanks again for having me.
Cool. So yeah, let's hear from Ian Riley and Bill Choi and Will Strange. I'm sort of differentiating Will and Bill mainly because both of their first names formally are William, so rather than get too confusing. So yeah, if you'd like to perhaps each of you go quickly through your backgrounds, with in terms of your background of tech and your product development journey.
Thanks, Alex. So I started my career a long time ago in defence and aerospace, and then transitioned through to the energy sector, and then ended up working at Invitech for nearly 15 years. And over that time, developing products in all of those spaces. So I've done a lot of medical device systems and what I'd call software-controlled electromechanical devices. So robotic laboratory systems, smoke detectors, things for the consumer industry, and for food and agriculture. And so over that time, I've had a lot of experience, but also developed a lot of scars and seen the industry in both software and hardware develop and transform over that time. And basically seen, you know, a lot of software intruding more and more into products, so that now almost everything has an integrated circuit or a microprocessor in it that's doing something, talking to the internet or taking commands and doing something with that. Do you want me to go on, Alex, to eShepherd?
I think no, perhaps just if each of you we could come back to that in terms of the company stories and so on. But Will, if you'd like to share your sort of background and the name of your company, Sports Performance Tracking.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously my parents weren't overly innovative with my name. So there's two of us, 66% of the presenters here have got the name Will. But yeah, my background over the past, or prior to SPT, was mainly in sales. So I'd been a commercial real estate agent in property development and sort of marketing and advertising sales over a 6 or 7 year career. So it wasn't overly long, but it gave me enough naivety to think that I could do everything myself, and really jumped into the aspect of building a business and a product in a pretty difficult space in the end. Initially it was sports, so it's very sexy. But inevitably what I found out was that there are, you know, form factor requirements and other things that we can talk about later. But yeah, my background isn't in technology. It's in sales, execution, and business strategy. And ultimately have taken that into an area of understanding technology. And as sort of my tech team say now, I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to do it myself. So that's sort of the position that I found myself in now.
Cool. And Bill Choi.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Choi. And my parents, I guess, weren't too innovative either with my name. Yeah, so I've been in startup for about 15 years. I had an exit just over 10 years ago, and I've been investing actively in businesses. And one of those investments was a company called Backjoy, which is based in Colorado. and I invested together with the founder for Crocs. And Backjoy is a portable sitting device that when you sit on it, it activates your pelvic muscles into your natural spine position. So we became an Inc. 500 company. I ran the product development for Asia Pacific and ran Backjoy Korea as the managing director. And I got involved with the business because I suffered from back pain for well over a number of years that I've been doing startup, and I really tried everything on the market, like products that were on the shelf and either gimmick can't handle scientific backing, and FDA products that you have to use in a controlled environment, and wearable devices that collect the data and track you, but they're pretty invasive to daily life. So what I ended up doing was I launched Posture 360, where we are wearables. We design and we manufacture wearable products that focus on preventing on back pain and focus on optimal posture. And so basically it is a retail play, but I consider ourselves a B2C2B business, where we also have an AI-based big data platform where the app that we gamify for the users, where data is downloaded onto the SaaS platform so that industry partners are able to track their employees for better health, offer discounts off insurance, for example, if they aren't, and for the insurance as well, and sports and medical.
Cool. So yeah, let's just get into sort of understanding more about each of your company stories and IoT products, and about the complexity of building them and developing them, and a whole lot of other issues. But and let's weave it into a bit of a discussion as we go. So I guess whoever likes to go first, describe their company story in terms of what they've developed. I think each of you have got a slide that we can share in terms of just showing the visuals of the IoT product that's of relevance to this discussion. Whoever wants to go first.
So
looks like the screen's go, Ian.
I can go first, but it says the just need to enable. Okay, very good. Thanks. So about 8 years ago now, I originally thought of a concept for a virtual fence for livestock. That the idea came up when I was visiting a property in central Queensland that had connection with my family. And I did some investigation, found that CSIRO had developed technology in this area, but no one had commercialized it and created the world a virtual fence for livestock. So in 2014, we launched Adjasense as an ag tech startup to commercialize this technology. In 2015, we licensed the IP from CSIRO as an exclusive worldwide license, and then set about developing the world's first virtual fence system for livestock. So a virtual fence is defined by GPS coordinates, and you'll see on the diagram, it's a typical sort of IoT system where the animal is wearing the wearable, the neckband. It communicates to a base station that's internet connected. There's a cloud system, and then the farmer uses their smartphone or tablet. So effectively, this means a farmer can be anywhere in the world with their tablet and move their cattle and monitor them and fence them simply by drawing a fence on their iPad or their smartphone. So this is it's an automation system, uses GPS and a bunch of other IoT technologies which have emerged over the last few years. So the core tech here is the neckband contains a training algorithm, a piece of software that effectively acts as an animal trainer. So the neckband itself trains the animal using some stimulus, both unpleasant and pleasant stimulus, to encourage the animal correct behavior from the animal, and they learn that, and then they respond to the signals that they receive from the collar. The device also includes other sensors, so it includes inertial motion sensors. So effectively, It acts as a Fitbit for cows, as well as a virtual fence. So it also has technology there that monitors and watches over the animal 24/7. So it knows second by second when that animal is grazing, resting, walking, running, ruminating, and various other activities. So we engaged 3 different design houses to get started with product development. And then as we matured the first prototype, we built up an in-house team to support that. We did a 5-stage development process, starting with proof of principle technology from CSIRO. And then we set about developing the neckband first, being the most challenging piece, and then the base station, and finished up with the cloud and the user application. User application is still in development, and it's something that is the most easily adapted and will go on for years. So we started manufacturing in-house, first in small quantities of 1,000 or 2, and then transferred it over to manufacture in one of the largest EMS manufacturers in China. So far, we've raised over $25 million in equity and grant funding. And a critical element of that was aligning the maturity of product development stages to prove out the technology and support capital raising milestones. The company now has about 40 people in Melbourne and on a research farm in Queensland. And we have a distribution agreement with a worldwide product supplier, which is the Gallagher company. They make electric fences. That distribution agreement covers Australia, New Zealand, US and Canada. Some of the challenges we faced with this, which I hadn't really faced with many other products, was simply the difficulty of upgrading and prototyping firmware in a product that sits on an animal. So if we needed to make a change to our firmware, we had to go to Queensland, drive for 4 or 5 hours, and bring in cattle into the yards and then upgrade the firmware and test it that way. Working on animals was very challenging as well, because animals have their own minds and they behave in the way they want to behave. So it's very difficult sometimes to get them to actually do things to test out our firmware. And they're very unpredictable. And the other one was I guess the primary challenge with upgrading was that the LPWAN network had to be cover a wide area. So it has a range of 15 to 20 kilometers, but that means that the data pipe off that system is very small. So all upgrades of firmware and other types of software had to be done in the field by bringing cattle in and sometimes taking collars off and putting collars back on. So a very time consuming and labor intensive process.
How long did it all take, Ian?
Yeah, so we launched
End to end.
off product development in earnest at the end of 2015. We had our first on-farm trial of a prototype, which was an early prototype, 2017, and then really a stable product that could be tested in volume in 2019. So it is a characteristic of hardware products like this that the development cycles are long and the prototype iterations can take a long time because of this, the hardware and software combination. So to do an upgrade to our firmware at the moment, we'd go through a 4-stage process, and it takes about 3 months to design test it, bench test it on a controlled environment on a farm in Queensland, then take it out to an early adopter farm, and then have it ready for commercial release.
You mentioned manufacturing in-house. How valuable is it to do it that way rather than go straight to a manufacturer?
I think the primary problem we faced was that we needed volume, hundreds or 1,000 or 2,000 wearables very early on, and were able to test out the system. but the system wasn't mature enough to be able to transfer to a manufacturer because they want a very stable system. So we tried prototyping to a number of prototype houses in Australia. They didn't live up to expectations, were fairly poor, and we found that out fairly early on. So we set up our own manufacturing line. We had a small team. We had 6 assembly workers we hired, and then 3 people to manage and run that process. The benefit of doing that was that we were able to iron out a lot of manufacturing issues, a lot of design issues, because our teams were co-located. The manufacturing engineer is sitting right next to the product development engineer. We were able to sort out a lot of issues, substantially reduce the cost of manufacture, and reduce a lot of the manufacturing issues before they were transferred to a manufacturer in China.
Do you think that would be something that a lot of product developers is the best path, especially in the IoT space, to go down that path?
It would
just
depend.
one way.
Yeah, it would depend on the product. If you've got something that you only need to manufacture in small volumes in order to test it and trial it out, then you can probably engage with a manufacturer and do prototype runs with them, because the impact of a small problem is easily dealt with small volumes. If you've got a much larger and complicated device, you really need to bed that ad out first and iron out the problems, because manufacturers hate change, and any change for them is a huge amount of work and risk to their whole supply chain and process. So you need to be able to work with the manufacturer to be able to transition from small volumes to larger volumes, and that takes time.
Sure.
I think too, people that understand that to do a prototype run, you can often do that within a couple of months, but to actually put something into manufacture in a factory anywhere that engages their whole MRP system and their supply chain, which is what you need to be able to make volume manufacture, that can be a 9 to 12 months exercise with a manufacturer who's already set up and ready to go. It just takes that amount of time, particularly if they're overseas.
Sure. Okay, great to get a better sense of that process. Who'd like to go next? Maybe start with Bill or Will. Who'd like to talk about how they developed, or you developed your IoT products from concept to launch?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I see Bill's still muted, so whilst I'm not. Yeah, obviously, a similar path in a sense of, the view of what I certainly agree with and echo some of those comments. So to give a bit of background on who and what and why SPT exists. So back in 2014, 2015, a very good friend of mine was playing in the AFL Grand Final, and he had 16 or 17 weeks injured, and he was a bit of a star player. And they were umming and ahhing for weeks about him coming back. And I remember having a conversation a couple of days before the grand final, if he was going to play. And he turned around and said to me, "I've already played 3 games in the last 3 weeks. No one knows, because I've been using GPS tracking." So I remember looking at that going, "Oh, right, that's really interesting." At that point in time, I was 24 or 25, playing local amateur footy, Aussie rules down here in Victoria. And, certainly had a passion for technology. I always have, but never been able to develop it myself, just like spending money on it. But looking at the story behind that athlete and what GPS did sort of triggered in my brain a connection, my connection for sport and my connection for technology. I actually was running a business at that time, and we'd just been on Shark Tank and done a few things with that business, and thought, whilst I've got a bit of time, I may as well look at something else. Why not bite off more than what I can chew? So off the back of that ideation, I sort of thought, all right, well, GPS itself is existing technology. Lots of people know how it works. The consumer knows how it works, or at least accepts that it works. Why can't you take it into sports, and why is it expensive, like what the elite athletes were doing at AFL or rugby league level, that was costing $50,000 and $60,000 and $70,000 per year for a team? And I looked at that and said, all right, well, why can't I buy one off the shelf? Again, naivety. Why can't I buy one off the shelf, cut off the wristbands on it, basically stick it to your back and track everything I was doing in a game? And started doing that. It was a little Magellan GPS unit, pretty ugly, but ultimately did what it required back in 2015. And that was give me information around my performances when I was playing local footy. So, the ability for me to see during a game or after a game or during training how far and fast I've run. From an enjoyment perspective was really interesting, but also, the first time I wore it, I thought I'd run 7 or 8 kilometers in a game, and I ended up running 14 or 15. So it fundamentally changed how I trained. Ultimately from there, I hacked up a little website and started selling these units online. And I remember I got a call from the Magellan team up in Sydney. They were a big, multinational, and they asked why I'd been buying so many, because I've got a wholesale contract with them. And I actually put up the price by $150 of what they were selling in JB Hi-Fi and Harvey Norman. And within 3 months was selling 3 times the amount of what they were. And they had 117 stores. So at that point in time, I realized I had an idea and it had a marketplace. So for me, I set out a bit of a goal to build the most affordable, smallest and most powerful unit on the market. So I really did pick some easy goals, making anything with batteries and GPS and, the circuitry that requires to get an accuracy, as well as, gyroscopes and quaternions, magnetometers, all these types of things, to make that small, powerful, but also make it cheap. And I don't like using the word cheap, but the premise is that it needs to be affordable, that people can, anyone can buy it. It doesn't need to be for professionals. So went about that. Interestingly, realized that I didn't know how to do it. So I went and partnered with a local company here in Melbourne that at that time was 50 or 60 employees. Now they're 300 or 400. So I got pretty fortunate that I picked a good partner there who came on board and really helped me develop the technology behind it. So over the course of 2016, we developed the software and the hardware in conjunction. Initially took a version of hardware that was an off-the-shelf product for pilots and in the aviation sector, and changed the firmware around a little bit so we could get exactly what we needed, and started selling it, launched our software, and things really started picking up. We had national teams in sort of soccer globally, starting to ask questions because they couldn't afford the elite solutions. And we were the first one in the market globally under $1,000 per player. And we were at that point in time, the $375 per player mark. Developed the software on the back of that and continued to develop that to this day. And we launched our own version of the GPS unit 2018, which is, I have it on here, a little GPS unit. So you can't quite see it. It's got to have it in front of my face. That slots in the back. You can see it on the image on your screen and tracks the player, gives real-time insights into how far and fast, how many impacts, the work rates, how much time you spent sprinting, walking, running, jogging, whatever it is, and also sends that back to your parents on the sidelines or to the coach at different levels. We certainly, sort of going on to some of the things we found, developing our own version of the product from scratch, which we've got patents on and other things, albeit, gives great value and gives us the flexibility and requirements that we require. There certainly were some unforeseen circumstances that hurt us initially. So we developed and tested over the course of a 12-month period because we didn't want to put thousands of units out there and then find out that there was a problem. And we ran our first pilot test, commercial pilot validation study, which was 500 units, and found out within 2 months or less than that the batteries drained so much that you could never turn them back on again. So if someone used it for a weekend and then put it in their drawer for 2 weeks or 3 weeks because they got injured or something like that, they would never turn back on. So we certainly learnt the hard way to make sure you do your testing and make sure you run through your processes, but also that developers, whether it's firmware, hardware, or software, they all have their own habits, and other people don't have the same habits. So whether it's, you know, keeping the device fully drained or fully charged, you've got to look at all different variables, and that's really hard when you're talking about IoT, and especially something that's developed around being in a form factor that's really small, really sleek. We have to pass FIFA requirements, World Rugby requirements for them to be able to be used in sports. They've got to be small enough that they can't damage the body. There was certainly some issues in the early stages, and ultimately continue to be. You know, there's always circumstances where in certain environments, whether it's sweaty, humid environments, whether it's, you know, tropical rain, whether it's up in the Northern Territory where we know the connection to the satellites can be a bit thrown, you're always innovating and wanting to change. So we made sure that we developed that it can be changed, you know, on anyone's computer. But then you've got the added risk of, you know, remote updating across platforms is a pretty high risk, especially when they're changing all the time. High risk sort of project, but it's something that we always said that we needed because for that exact reason. So it is, you know, the conversations that we've had offline with Bill and Ian, there's a lot of similarities between anyone building wearable IoT devices, but there's also, you know, a lot of unknowns in different sectors. So, you know, you look at, Ian said before that the animals are different to humans, but they're all in their own challenging environments. So we know that, you know, a human, you know, one of the things I only need 4 hours of battery because that's all a human could ever do anyway. Whereas, you know, when you're looking in Artisans and what Ian's talking about, you know, the form factor and the size of it isn't as big an issue as having a long life battery or remote updating. So, you know, understanding the nuances of what your customer wants and what I call the Peter and Paul effect, which is you're always robbing Peter to pay Paul, whether that's form factor, that comes with different costs, different flexibilities, different complications. You've just got to make sure that you're making the right decisions, then ideally trying to test it as well.
Yeah, that's a really big issue, and I know that's something we talked about pre the webinar. There are some questions for you,
Yep.
Will, as well, but I thought before going on, given the time factor, I thought we'd go straight to Bill Choi to hear his story, and then we can sort of break it up a little bit more. Bill?
Yep.
Great.
Thanks,
thanks, guys. Yeah, so when you're looking at the experiences of everybody, I mean, I would say, you know, we face very similar experiences. I initially got in the business, as I mentioned before, well, I mean, first of all, I mean, I suffer from back pain myself, and I've really, and so does my wife. She had back surgery, and you know, a lot of friends have back problems, and you always see them having these different types of products, you know, and I always found that the one product that did work as just a device, not a wearable, but just as a functional device was the company that I invested in. That's the reason why I invested in it, was because it was a functional product that optimized your posture when you sat. And so I had severe rounded shoulder and lower back pain. But that product worked. The problem is that, and you know, just really, I saw how many units we were selling, and I was thinking, well, you know, wouldn't it be great if we just approached a hospital and get some clinical data around this? Because I mean, obviously, sales is speaking for itself, and I just thought, you know, why don't we just get these endorsed by doctors? So I approached a few hospitals. And then, of course, you know, with my relationships at Samsung, you know, we would go for beers, and I would talk to the engineers and say, you know, can we put like sensors into these sitting devices? And I just, because I carry it around with me, and I wish I had it just over on the other side there. And they were like, yeah. And so we did a lot of experimentation during my time, and by putting these sensors into these seats. And at the time, Bachelor was developing this product called, which was a posture wear, posture shirt. And it was functional. You know, they spent quite a bit of dollars into it, you know, getting a lot of advice and design work with chiropractors, and fitness instructors, physical therapists, etc. That was a 2-year project. They decided to drop it. And so they had all these really great functional products. And I just thought, you know, why don't I just take these products and see how we could actually have them backed by doctors and put sensors into them. And so they said, look, we're not doing this anymore. Why don't you go ahead and run with it? And so that's what I did. So I started Posture 360. And as I mentioned before, a lot of products that were sort of gimmicky out there. You have, as I mentioned before, FDA approved products that are, doctors would use them. They're big and bulky and have to use them in a controlled environment. And then you have these wearable devices that are pretty invasive to daily life. And so what I saw like this big gap in the market where I could really design and manufacture beautifully design posture products that are backed by doctors and bake sensor technology into them that connect to a mobile app and gamify it. And as well as offer a SaaS platform for industry users, such as corporate wellness and insurance. It is a pretty big industry. I mean, you always know that people suffer from tech stack and back pain, but after doing some research, I launched a business, $500 billion business globally. Australians alone spend $5 billion a year just on back-related problems. And it's also the #1 cause of income poverty and early retirement. And also, with it being the #1 claim on insurance and insurance companies having problems with this, there is no real solution on the market. So I wanted to create, if you will, this one-stop ecosystem where we could provide these really nice functional products, and then all these products would collect the data as well as help them into optimal posture and have them tracked by their provider or their payee. And so that's sort of where we are right now. We will be launching our very first wearable called Posture Pods, which goes around your ears. You're able to put them onto your put them onto your AirPods. And because the idea behind that was text neck. I would lose my AirPods. I lost 2 of them already. And I was actually looking for a necklace just to kind of keep them. So if I stopped using them, I could just put them around my neck. And I figured, why don't we have this wearable that we could actually put around your neck, which actually was a company that we acquired that was ironically based in South Korea called Alex Posture. And so now we've been able to sort of really expedite and our development rather than starting from scratch. So there is essentially 2 ways where you could develop a product. You could, build the team yourself, or you could, acquire a company where you have a win-win situation and figure out a structure that works for both parties. And so we went the acquisition route, and that was share for share. And then that's how we're able to really get this business to where we are today over the past 3.5 years. So we launched in the first quarter of 2017, and now we're ready to. We've developed all of the product, the shirt product, the pods. We're developing the seat as we speak. We have the mobile app, and we already have retail channels, not only in Australia and South Korea, but also in other countries due to the network I've already established over the years, posture distribution.
Are you manufacturing the product, Bill, in Korea or?
Yeah, we're manufacturing in Korea. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where we are right now.
Cool. Yeah, I think one of the things I remember we discussed pre-webinar as well was something that both Will and Bill have raised, which is, I guess, around the notion of working collaboratively with hardware and software teams and how to integrate that. You're very lucky, are you not, Bill, with the fact that you've got access to a whole lot of software engineers from Samsung?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of guys that left Samsung to join. But again, you have these. Well, my challenge in particular is that because we are an Australian entity, and we have a very sizable R&D, design and manufacturing team and partners in South Korea. And so when you sort of deal with, cross-border teams, and, obviously remote, everyone's starting to do that, but really you want to, because we are vertically integrated completely, and we have existing customers, you have a sales team, and then you have your software engineers, and then you have your hardware engineers, and then you have your UI UX guys, and you're trying to have everyone speak the same language, and sometimes they're just far off, and on top of that, you're dealing with an international team. So you would think that as long as I would be able to provide the direction and the detail, which I know very intimately, to really have them actually speak to each other could be quite challenging. It was funny, we talked about this before, but even though they're sitting right next to each other, you still can't have them. They just don't talk to each other unless you actually try to arrange the meeting, right, and have them actually express ideas, and so so there's a lot of complexity around it in a launch situation or in a development situation that I thought would be simple, because a lot of the heavy lifting has been done, but it's a management of the people, the ideas, the languages, and I wouldn't say it's because it's Korean and English. It's just the fact that the way they understand things when you're trying to put everybody into one, it's speaking the same language when everyone speaks a different language in terms of terminology and what have you, was my biggest that really delayed a lot of things that happened.
Yeah. Will, Ian, you had some similar stories to share, the interaction between hardware and software teams, your experiences?
Yeah, sorry. Happy to talk to that. So one of the things that happens particularly with engineers, is they like to work in their own domains that they're familiar with. So if you divide them broadly into mechanical engineers who design plastic bits and sheet metal and integrate things together, electronics engineers who make up and design PCBs, put little black things on tracks and manufacture those things. And then software sits inside those in a CPU and in the electronics. Each of those like to work in their own domain. And so they're quite happy to run off and design and work independently without even talking to the person who might be next door to them. So I've had experience where I've co-located my design teams and sat the electronics engineer right next to the software engineer. So they have to walk past each other and they still didn't talk to each other. So it is really important to be able to get a team together that and get them working together and talking to each other about their problems, because they all need to work together to make the product work. And they all tend to think themselves, or the software engineers think that the software runs the product, so it's the most important thing. The CAD designer thinks that the plastic part that holds it all together, that's the most important thing. And then the electronics guy thinks that his resistor choices and his CPU choices and other things, that's what makes it all work. And in reality, you need all of those things to be working together to make a working product. So, getting teams like that working together, one way is simply to co-locate. That doesn't do the job sometimes. Forcing them to meet daily with a daily stand-up is another way to do it. So, for 15 minutes a day, everyone has to get up and talk about what they're doing and problems that they're working on. So it forces them to hear about other people's problems. That's a good way. A weekly meeting, if you've got different teams in different companies working together, particularly if they're on different sides of the world, getting them regularly meeting. So a meeting is at 5 p.m. every Wednesday. Regardless of whether you've got things to talk about or not, you still have to be there. That does force people to talk about things. The other curious thing that I've experienced working overseas, so I've often run teams where we have a team in Europe, team in the United States, maybe one in Japan and one in Australia, working together. And one of the advantages of having a team in Europe is that you actually get 24 hours of work done. Because while you're sleeping in Australia, your team in Europe is beavering away doing things. And when you come in the next day, you know, the work is done. You get an instant answer to the email that you sent the night before, and that's great. The other curious thing that happens is that because people are a long way away, they think, I must talk to them. Whereas if they're sitting in the chair next door, in the next desk, they think, I don't need to talk to them because they're sitting in the chair next to me. I can talk to them anytime they like. And so we often had comments from our teams in Europe or the United States that they had better communication with our team in Melbourne than what they did with the team in the next building. And it's that psychology of, I better work at communication because it's important, versus I don't need to work at it because the person's sitting next to me and I can talk to them anytime I like.
Yeah, I can touch on that as well. We had a similar experience. I mean, obviously it hasn't been years for us to identify whether it's a long-term thing or a short-term thing, but certainly the removal from the office down here in Victoria, which we still haven't been able to go back to, hasn't actually slowed us up from a productivity standpoint. There is obviously added disadvantages that I'm seeing and I'm hearing from some of the developers around, you know, a lot of them actually use it as their social engagement, you know, work. So they're actually missing that a little bit. You can start to see them making up for it in the conversations that we're having. So that's both a negative and a positive for the business and the culture. The other interesting one, I mean, we obviously use daily stand-ups. We've gone down the dumb culture, and it sounds a bit stupid, but you know, as I'm not a technologist, but you know, I could walk in there, have a conversation, listen to it, understand what they're talking about, understand it enough to say, I don't know if that's true or that sounds plausible. But I walk in there and try and ask some dumb questions, because you've got two phases of developers. I've always found you've got the developers that are really confident, so much so that they're quite stubborn about what they do. And they're high quality, you know, the good developers that are really strong in that they've, you know, they can cross the T's and dot the I's. Then you've got the quite subdued and less confident, generally junior or newer developers that are quite worried about speaking out of turn. And ultimately you struggle to get the buy-in there. So going in with that dumb culture is no conversation is dumb. And some of our greatest breakthroughs have been from people that have asked probably stupid questions when it's phrased the way that it's phrased, but ultimately changes little nuances within the product. You know, why can't we do this? Tell me why, you know, that is the way we've always done it, or that's the way it's being done. And having that culture, which creates the communication, actually frees up, you know, the probably the highly strung developers that are a little bit more stubborn, but also the quiet, more nervous and shy developers that are happy to speak out of turn a little bit. And that certainly worked for us. You know, at times it doesn't work every time. I don't think anything does. But whenever I've engaged in there and really forced that sort of dumb questions and asking those simple questions, you just hear other people start doing it. And the responses I get back from management is, you know, for a flow-on of weeks, the same thing will continue to happen. And those breakthroughs actually come from some of those more simpler thoughts from people thinking in a different perspective, but too nervous to talk about it usually.
Cool. Cool. I'll go to the questions given the time. And there is one question here that I think could apply to each of you, actually. It was from James Snow saying around SPT, Will, that you've been around for a while, and you know, I hear that, I'm reading it now, that hardware is pretty tough to scale to profitability, which is the ultimate success of any company. How's SPT reaching profitability? Are you profitable yet after 6 years?
First, it's a great question. You know, I always poke fun at this question a little bit. I don't know if anyone here's seen Silicon Valley, the TV show, but they say, don't make revenue, otherwise you get judged on revenues, and don't make profit because you get judged on profit. So we've been making revenue for 5 years now and only just started making profit you know, recently, and that's been because of the environment that we're in. So as we continued to grow, there's a 4-letter word that I was very strong on, my board were very strong on, it's called more. Every month that we close, we want more the next month. Now that may mean more money that we're putting into it, but ultimately you've got to build a business model that at some point in time can turn to cash flow positivity or profit. So during COVID for us, our target market is local and amateur sporting clubs across the globe, and our 2 biggest markets, Australia and the USA. The USA, the NCAA and AIA, which is 90% of colleges and high schools, has been cancelled for the year this year and was back in April or May. So our customers just dropped like flies, and that's the same in Australia, mainly in Victoria, but certainly outside of Victoria and Australia, there's been a lower number of community level sports going on because of obviously contact and COVID. We've actually forced ourselves to go, all right, we need to be cash flow positive for this period of time and then start scaling again. So you've got to build a business model for it. And if it's just about selling hardware, I think you're going to be in a bit of trouble. For us, we've got premium software features so people can upgrade their software without us having to deliver them hardware. And that's where we get our profitability from, or at least a higher level of profitability. But you're completely right. It is very difficult to scale it if it's just purely a single transactional hardware sale. You've got to look, in my opinion, you've got to look for a model that can bring in some sort of subscription revenue or no hardware revenue.
Yeah. There's another question here that's come through from Warwick Peel, which I think again could apply to all of you. I think around the profitability question, that'd be interesting to hear both from Bill and Ian. The thing is, though, I'm looking at the clock, we've only got 5 minutes. I mean, we're more than happy to go over time if people want to hang around as we ask more and more questions, because I think it'd be great to hear about what Ian and Bill's experiences are around profitability as they grow. But the other point that Will could allude to, and it sort of taps into Warwick's question, is how they've pivoted with COVID. I think you were telling us the other day, Will, that you're doing a brand new business in the partnering with a veterinarian service over in the States to use your technology. Do you want to quickly talk about that before we go on to Warwick's question?
Touch on that really quickly, and I'm happy to stay around for a little bit after as well. Yeah, I mean, during this time it slowed down. We had some resourcing allocation that we're looking at different ideas, and one of the ones we had been working on, which we ramped up during this time, is the ability to use wearable technology to identify osteoarthritis within animals and specifically dogs. So we partnered with one of the world leading veterinarians over in the USA, as well as a human to animal incubator, let's call it. They're basically a Swiss-backed fund that allowed us to initially put our device onto a dog, track that dog across the course of a day through research and figure out how much OA, osteoarthritis, is affecting the dog's gait, movement, sit, stand, walk, jog, upstairs. So building an algorithm out the back of that, and we have been working on that for some time now, but certainly COVID, was a resource allocation, and that looks like it's, going to pay off. We'll find out at some point, but certainly looking at what other areas haven't been affected by COVID during this time, especially when you're in an area that has quite significantly. Obviously, some haven't, and some have been positive on it, but ours definitely had.
Yeah, so in terms of the future of advanced manufacturing and ideas generally, where's Warwick's comment? Where are we? The question? I mean, Warwick, you could even unmute yourself if you wish. Seem to have lost it. There we are. With COVID being a chance for a reset, this is a panel. How can we have engineering excellence, advanced manufacturing, and create future industries in building a new economy? It's quite a big picture question.
Yeah, I have to keep this quite short, and sorry just to jump in here, but I do have to leave in a couple minutes. But just to address that, that question. Well, I mean, it is actually a really good opportunity now, because now you're able to actually build on ideas with problems that are happening right now. And everyone is affected. It's a global issue. And we just, for us, I mean, we were able to kind of slide right in there quite nicely with the future of work. People going more remote, and people will be working more at home. And so this issue of back pain, even though it wasn't much of a problem, but there was a lot of noise in terms of the wellness space. But now with telehealth and with home fitness, and I found that people have to start buying new chairs, and they want to become more aware of it. And for us, it's become quite I guess a nice little opportunity for us to be able to capitalize on something like this. And now what we're able to do is, even though we are a wearable company, we're able to also scale and focus more on our Posture Live platform, so that at least hospitals and corporate wellness and companies are able to be more connected to their patients and employees, and helping them their posture and prevent. And really, when we're looking towards pivot, we haven't pivoted much. Obviously, in terms of communication, that's affected us quite a bit. Having to go to the manufacturer and figure out what we're going to do there, and there's been quite a few delays. But other than that, for us, we're just going to go pretty strong on the business platform, which is all connected to. Anyway, thanks a lot, guys. I'm really sorry.
Okay,
about
well,
this.
thank you
guys.
so much, Bill. We'll talk again
Thank
soon.
you, Bill.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks,
Take
Bill.
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers. So, Ian, Will, and Warwick's question.
Yeah, it's interesting actually observing what's going on with COVID, with the communication, because working remotely is not new for me. I really started doing that in the late 90s, working at Invitech, where we basically focused on all of our clients being in Europe, United States, or Japan, and got used to working in that way. I think that, that experience taught me that it's a lot easier than what you think to think about the world globally and your customers globally rather than Australia. And I think that this experience might be helping other people realize that we can do that now with the internet and with mobile devices. It's just as easy to be working with someone in Germany as working someone in Sydney or in the next suburb. And so I think that will help change mindset. I'm hoping that it will help, open up people's expectations for what they can achieve, and treat the world as a global village rather than as their own country, and their market being in their own country. Just to think about it globally right from the start. And that's what we did with AgiSense. The first year I went overseas and went to find out who had done what overseas in the US, in Europe, who was doing what was available, where were the technologies that we needed, and approached it as a global market from the start.
Yeah, and I can probably do a quick answer to that is, if anyone else has got the answer here, let me know. It'd be quite interesting, because I certainly think that's an opportunity. The ownership and trust that we're seeing that has been thrust upon many businesses, I think is going to be one of the most significant changes to how people respond. So that both business owners, going back a couple of years, would have I been comfortable with everyone working from home all day? I'd certainly be uncomfortable. It would be new to me, and it certainly doesn't sit perfectly with me. But the ownership that we've seen is people actually have to drive their own innovation, their own thoughts, their own daily work, and create their own work ethic, which I'm hoping is a positive for the future, because there's also some concerns with people my age that I've seen see this as an opportunity to work less, or kind of just take. But the flip side is I'm also seeing the separation of those that want to achieve having more time. They're not commuting an hour and a half a day. They're spending more time with their families, which actually makes them fresher when they think, and they're coming up with more innovative ideas. Now, history will tell us that, but I certainly think there is an opportunity for a reset. My worry is that the world's a pretty fickle place when it comes to memory of recent activities, whether that be, past sort of economic events. People go back to what they tend to have done pretty quickly. So it'd be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years. But I do think the greatest innovation will come from people, because people are going to be given more trust and more, responsibility moving forward.
Cool. There was another question that was buried somewhere in the early stage from Lynn Woods about comparing SPT to Catapult Sports. She was wondering how different it was from Catapult Sports.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of use a bit of a scenario. It's like a BMW and a Toyota. We're probably the Toyota in that phase that, their technology is built and is specific for, sports scientists at a very high level. They're spending $50,000 to $100,000 a year with this technology. It's very complex. And in some senses, it's very tough for the average person to understand. We've taken the concept of what that is, and we've had articles written about us. The fact that I started the idea because I approached Catapult and they said no, was really trying to simplify it. I think that's the greatest thing that we provide, is really simple information for actionable insights. Whereas they provide a lot of information which is fantastic for someone that wants to spend 5 days trying to analyze it at 1 or 2% gains. That's not necessarily our audience. So in short, very similar, but in terms of our customer, mainly different.
Yeah.
Alex, I've seen a question too around funding models and also investors. Like, just a little bit, if someone can dive in and talk about that in terms of, there's a few things here. There's the investment model. I think the question was around how do you encourage investors to come on board for a 5 to 6 year journey with no profitability or even no product on the market. And then another one to add was within the software space, which is predominantly where I focus, it can be a little bit challenging to generate more R&D tax incentives, etc. How does that come into play in hardware, especially when we've got patents on products, and how has that assisted you going forward?
So I can talk to that one from our experience. I think first, one of the advantages of software is that it's easily changed and fluid, and therefore you can do some very quick turnarounds. And there's a whole sector of the investment community that is only investing in apps and other software-based devices or applications, and they can turn those around quickly, and you can actually get something out in the market, test it, demonstrate, market traction and so on. And in the hardware space, that's very, very difficult unless you've got a very simple product, particularly in sectors like medical devices, where, you've got a whole approval process that Bill's going through before you can even sell your product. So I think the way we worked on that was to really work out a development process staged beforehand, put that into our investor deck and our messaging to our investors, and then take them on that journey. So it was quite critical for us to align making key technical achievements. So, we're going to build a prototype that will do this, and then actually build the prototype and do that, and then be able to show investors, we said we were going to do that, and we went and did it. So now we want another investment round to get to the next stage, and it's going to cost more to get to that stage. And then when we got there, we're going to do something else, and so on. So, I think if you can articulate that stage and as process, and then align that to your funding, that will help bring those investors on the journey. Having said that, in raising the funds was the hardest part of the whole process in all.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah. I think the other thing to remember is that investors, some like to invest in software because they feel comfortable with that. Some like hardware because it has that difficulty of you know, copying and replacing. It's just such, if it takes you 3 years to get to market, it takes your competitor 3 years as well. And so they like that solidity of a hardware product and its permanence. And so you're really looking at investors from that stream. If you've got an investor who wants a quick turnaround and a quick buck in 12 months and, you know, is going to get 20 times what they put in, that's not for a hard product. You need different long-term investors who really understand and know the space that you're working in and understand the investment cycle and are going to be with you on the journey. So we really looked for investors that were, you know, long stage, long time frame, patient investors that were willing to stick with us.
Yep, makes sense.
Mm.
How about yourself, Will? How
Yeah,
did that go for you?
Yeah, well,
Will,
I certainly echo some of those thoughts. You know, if an investor's coming in expecting quick turnarounds, I'd certainly be saying no, because bad investors will be substantially more damaging than how helpful a good investor would be. And you're right in saying that, you know, it's much easier. Well, nothing's easy, but it's much faster to copy a software product than it is a hardware product because of the testing requirements, you know, the process of building it. So the barrier to entry is both more difficult and more costly. So from that perspective, you know, there are specific investors. There's also, you know, specific valuations based on whether you're hardware, whether you're SaaS, whether you're, you know, the lifetime value of customers, these types of things, and different investors are going to want different businesses for that. So for us, you know, I certainly agree on the thoughts when you're talking to an investor, especially around a hardware product, you've got to base that around milestones. You've got to base that around, you know, objectives that you're going to achieve. And 100% agree with investors love you achieving what you're going to say, because then they can believe what you're about to say again. So from that perspective, you know, breaking it down really simply, no one understands your product like you do, and don't expect them to ever do. So try and make it much more simpler for them to understand in a commercial and in a financial perspective, not just blow their socks off with lots of tech talk, because that actually confuses them a lot of the time.
Cool. Great question, Andrew. Any other questions from anyone? We're well over time anyway, so I guess it's a big thank you to Will and Ian and Andrew and David, I think, has just left, and everyone who attended today. As I said, our next webinar will be on the 18th of November. I think there's a lot of interest and there's a lot of issues to unpack around IoT. So with Andrew at Aerion, we'll certainly be developing more webinars around that as well.
There's a lot of angles,
link.
Alex. I wanted to say that there's a lot of angles that you can see into the development between software and hardware and getting to the more good, successful product. But I don't think that we can cover all of it in just one webinar.
That's
so
correct.
That's why we want to have continued discussion about
Yeah,
this.
absolutely. And the event with Venture Cafe as part of the Spark Festival that we're one of the participants, I've sent you a link in the chat box for anyone who wants to attend. And thanks very much again.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for that. That was good.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks all.
Yeah, great.
Okay, cheers.
Thanks,
See ya.
Will.
Thanks, guys. Absolutely fantastic.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks.